remember that when things get rough, you can always leave over there and come here to Sankofa Books and sit down and relax. Because this is the liberation space and the liberation zone.
Global gentrification, and we're going to start with Mr. Lawrence Smith, who's a lawyer, an international, focused with international. Right? So I'll give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. Let me use this table to, I made some notes on the airplane yesterday. I thought about gentrification and international, or what's happened globally. And I think you have to start with America and what has happened in America or the U.S. And then we'll take it from there. I want to hit some broad strokes of concepts. And then hopefully, after I get through hitting first thing I want to talk about is Primal Gentry. Okay, and you hear the connection between gentrification and Primal Gentry. And I don't know if you know what it means, but I'll tell you. It's a concept that came out of Europe in the 1800s, okay? And or the 18th century, the 17th, well, basically the 1600s, and it dominated as they colonized the world and wealth came to the European countries. Primal Gentry became a very effective tool. And the tool was this, or by law, the eldest son of a European or British subject, a male, inherited all his father's property and inheritance. Okay? Women didn't count. And that was the concept of Primal Gentry. The other concept I want to throw out is third son Primal Gentry, and that's what happened in America. Okay. What does the third son Primal Gentry mean? Well, since the first son inherited all that the father had, then the second son usually became a priest or went into the military. So what did the third son do? Well, the third son was given some money, and he had breeding, and he had education, and he basically was sent to the world. And when you trace the founding fathers in America, you will find that a good deal of them were out of this concept of Primal Gentry, okay? Because they were basically in places where there was no education, there was no money, and there was no sophistication. So they got here, they had sophistication, they had money, not a little money, but in a place with no money makes it a lot of money, okay? And they had breeding, okay? All right, that's another stroke. So when you look at America and you look at who made up these people who laid the foundation upon how this place functions, having ideas on one hand and the practicalities of how it functions on the other, what you find is a concept that they came up with, and I'm skipping a lot of history, but what they have a concept that all the people here, other than them, and when I say them, I'm talking about the aristocracy or the aristocracy that ended up here, meaning they had land, meaning they had breeding, meaning they had education. They came up with a concept that everybody else was a visitor, including the original Native American people that were here. Okay? And their concept of gentrification is about that concept of who belongs here and who doesn't. So if everyone else is a visitor and they are not, then everything that they land on or touch belongs to them. Okay? Now, when you look at their sense of identifying and how America grew. The first gentrification was on the native or original American people. They were the first people gentrified in America. Okay? And so I guess we should define what gentrification is in terms of how they have defined it, because we're using their dictionary. They have defined it where, or I looked it up. One of them is that middle class people come into an area of lower class and no class, and I don't believe in class, by the way. But anyway, they move into an area, and they therefore are gentrifying that area based on this concept of everybody else being a visitor, and then their religious faith, which is wrapped around this. Because if you look at, and everybody here knows about my brother's keeper. When you look at having this written into their theology and their faith, and this was God driven and God ordained for them to do this, and then not only was it in faith, then they turn around and codified it in law. Okay, now one of the things that happened though was that Primal Gentry ended in America legally. When they came here, they passed laws that were inconsistent with the Crown or Britain, and that was one of the pieces that was underneath, or one of the reasons for the Revolutionary War, notwithstanding tea and all the rest of it, was about power and ownership and how that ownership was going to be defined. What I want to do now is once you play with this visitor concept and everybody's a visitor, then I want to bring it forward, and I guess the theme of all of this is that when I say I don't look at class anymore, and the reason why is because class used to denote certain things, but now it's about who can participate. Okay, who can participate and function in the society that we live in today. Okay, Michael Lynn wrote a book called The Next American Nation. Okay, and in that book he defines a lot of this, not in terms of the stuff that you were taught, I guess, in the 8th grade about upper class, middle class, and lower class. Now it's about who can participate and what are the means of allowing or having the wherewithal to participate. And obviously we know it's the dinero, but certain other things. And so you tie it into who has that, but also who has the right to take what someone else doesn't have. Okay, or not what someone doesn't take somebody else's stuff and think it's yours, or have a concept that it's yours. Okay, so you can visit this on what's going on in present-day Palestine. You can look at what happened in South Africa. You can look at what is happening in Angola, what's happening anywhere in the world, in Brazil, anywhere in the world you look, these concepts are there if you just go and sit down and sit on the street and just look and see who lives where, who has what, who does what, and who has the best and who has the worst. Okay? Now, since we're all operating on a time frame, I want to take this and look at the financial service industry, which is what this toxic assets or these collateral debt obligations and these credit swap, this credit debt swaps, all in terms of toxic assets. I want to look at Geitner, okay? What's his name? Timothy Geitner, okay? And he's the Secretary of Treasury. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why did he become the Secretary of Treasury? And then when you look at somebody like Daschle, who probably was the best thing they had that was going to take on the healthcare system, and we all admit that healthcare is broken in America, and Daschle didn't make it, and Geitner did. Or even we look at Ron, I think Kirk, who's the trade ambassador. Anyway, during the process of the confirmation, and they had to be vetted, and then therefore they went through the Senate, and we all know the process. And in the vetting, Daschle had gotten rides in a limo, got rides in airplanes, and he didn't think that was ordinary income to him under the tax system that we use. And so it didn't get reported. And so when he looked at his record, he didn't have anyone willing to go to bat for him in the Senate because the contradictions were so great because he was an ex-senator, so he had to pass. Or you take a guy like Ron Kirk, who's the trade ambassador. He got tickets to a football game. He's got, he was the mayor of Dallas, and he got stuff, and it came up to about $8,000. They held him up, but he had to repay it, but he didn't have any concept when he was getting this ticket from a friend or this, that's ordinary income, and you're supposed to report that. Okay, so you get to Geitner. Okay, Geitner worked for the IMF, okay? And when anybody works for an international organization like the World Bank or the IMF, you get a primer. And in that primer, it tells you what taxes you have to pay. And they're in big, red, bright letters. And it's Donald Duck language, and it's explained to you. Okay? Geitner didn't pay those taxes. Okay? So when it became an issue, when he was being nominated for the Fed job, he blew him off, and then so the IMF stepped up and gave him the money to pay it. Okay, he said, bump that, I'm not going to pay it. He put the money in his pocket. Okay, so he got audited twice, and the auditors said he owed this money. Okay, he got some New York lawyers, put him on the case, and he was fighting it up until he got nominated for the Treasury job. So, and then that's when he rushed in and paid it. So the question is, if he's got, and these other guys, and I can mention some others, their activity was not willful, but his was, and they all knew it. So the question is, who did he have on his team that was sponsoring him, and why should he be the Secretary of Treasury? So I think the answer is obvious in terms of who's getting protected and the kind of stuff that they're doing up there now in terms of, it's the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the planet in terms of how they're taking the future generations up till the next 75 to 100 years of wealth that they are now extracting today to protect this group of people who he was put there to protect. Okay, so when I look at that, and then you look at, I was talking to somebody recently about trying to buy a house or dealing with these toxic assets, and you trying to get in to participate, you can't buy a property today and participate because the salaries are not in line with what it takes to buy. You know, I mean, if you're going to buy a $250,000 house or a $300,000 house, you got to be willing to pay anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a month. Okay? And you're going to have a substantial down payment. And so if you're only making $45,000, $48,000, $50,000 a year, you can't do that to make it work. So you can't participate on that level. Now, the other stroke I want to hit is, and to me, all of this, when we talk about Dashiell, and we talk about he was probably the best thing for bringing health care to a greater number of people than presently having in America. Okay, because he had the expertise and the tools within the Senate and within the healthcare industry to make it happen. And so when you look at the history of healthcare in America, this is what you got to ask yourself. And let's go back to 1948. In 1948, after World War II, all of the Western nations, the Scandinavian countries, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, all of them went on universal health care. And they started incrementally. And they built it up to where it is today in terms of the last 60 years. Okay? And so when you look at America, you have to ask yourself, since we won the war, why didn't we go on health care? Okay? Now, nobody asked that question. And it's like I don't even know if they think about it or they have wondered about it, but no one asked the question, no one answered. Well, I'm going to give you the answer. What happened was, in 1948, when Truman was president, and he was messing around with the League of Nations, and they were trying to get the United Nations going, he wanted to follow these European countries and go with universal care. Okay? And so when he got his program together, he took it to the Southern senators, who were known as the Dixiecrats, and each one of them said to a man, including Thurman, Eastland, Fulbright, I can give you the whole list. All of them said there will be no nigger in a hospital with a white woman as long as we are here in America. And so that killed health care from that day, and then these huge entities that have now moved in to make up the space that was created. So we have a healthcare system that's based on profit, that's based on you having an entitlement. And Mr. Obama, and I watched him very closely, as we all did, and the thing that I watched the most about him was he ran on a single pay care system. He said it over and over again. Okay? And I watched it. And that's one of the reasons why I said to myself, I know when he got to be president, all of these entitlement groups or tribes that's out there that have locked into these resources that they control, and they use the government and the politicians to support and back it up. I thought he would at least stand up for universal health care or the single pay care system. I thought he would say, listen guys, I gave you all of this. This is what I'm going to have, okay? When he had his health summit, he flat out walked away from it. He said, there will be no single pay care system. And John Conyers, who's the most strongest supporter of it, they try to keep him out of the healthcare summit, the healthcare, whatever that thing was called. He had to navigate and negotiate his way to get in there because they didn't even want to give him a seat. So what that said to me about him, and this directly goes back to this whole concept of global gentrification, because if you don't have health care, then you can't compete. Okay? And so what Obama has done is, by walking away from single pay care system, is the new niggers in America, and they got to be white or black, but the new niggers in America are the people who don't have health care. And you got about 40 or 50% of the population today that is on borderline, but definitely it's a good 35% that can't afford it and don't have it. Okay? Now, how does this, okay, so I guess one other concept is that when we look at General Motors or these other car companies that were having so much trouble, and these bankers got these huge bailouts, and the workers and the automobile companies couldn't get anything. Well, historically, their problem is every car they produce, when they have to compete with the Europeans who are making cars, they have a legacy cost tied to that car, and it's based on health care. I'll be finished in 2 minutes. They have health care. Each car has a legacy cost, and on that car, that legacy cost is health care. So you got each worker now who's responsible for his own health care, and they're competing against nations whose health care is paid for by the nation. So you got an individual competing against the nation in terms of health care. So obviously it cannot be equalized, and it's impossible for one then to, as in terms of America, in terms of being able to compete for these types of industries, they can't compete. And so, to wrap it up, the whole gentrification issue lies into each one. There's a lot of other examples I could tell about, but it lies into each one of these where if you are not at a certain level to participate, then you are going, and all these safety nets and all this other stuff they talked about is gone. You cannot participate because you can't compete, and therefore you can't live, or live a wholesome and decent life.
Thank you. We're going to ask speakers to stay within 20 minutes.
I was too long?
No, it's okay.
Too long.
Huh?
Yeah, but it's so, you know,
all right.
let's go. It's all right.
Okay.
It was
We're
so
gonna ask for a little
beneficial.
bit of 20 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead,
One,
right ahead.
and two, what we're going to do, we're going to have the speakers talk first, and then we're going to engage you in the conversation. So it's not a question and answer period. It's a conversation between us after we've had the first set of speakers talking. Len, you next.
Let's moderate from
Ryan
here. We
can
want
moderate.
Ryan. This
That's
sister
right.
has to be trained. When I travel,
Right.
she's my replacement. My wife and me do movies, so Ackland is usually not around. Today he's here, so we want to train her, and we want you to introduce the next speaker. I don't care how much you sweat. Sorry.
So thank you, Mr. Smith. Now we're going to talk to Mr. Lennox Stewart, and who is a sociologist and executive assistant to the chief academic officer from the District of Columbia Public Schools. So it's your floor.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. It's a good way to spend a wonderful day. I feel as though I'm in the Caribbean. I'm Trinidadian, as obviously, by birth and by development, obviously. And but looking at the weather, it's great weather. It's kind of similar to what's happening in most of the Caribbean islands. And most of us know there's a major conference happening in Trinidad as we speak in terms of the various heads of states from Central, South, and North America. So that is a political type of a coup in terms of those individuals there, and a lot of dialogue between some very strategic persons, our president and the president of Venezuela, and other places, Argentina. And so it's very interesting. Very interesting because we never, from an international standpoint, most of the governments of the United States in the past have tended to use the Caribbean as a form of a byproduct of the emphasis on various types of issues, may that be trade or drugs or various other types of commodities. But thank you again, Ryle, and I was very much interested in doing this. as said, I'm a sociologist by training. So I'm going to look at this perspective from a sociological point of view. What that means, in fact, is that gentrification can be looked at from various points. You know, you can look at it from a strictly economic standpoint, planning and development. You have, as Lawrence mentioned, you know, various types of issues involved with the whole circumspection of analyzing gentrification. But I'm going to try to look at it from a sociological perspective using an international forum. So this is what I had done in terms of my research. I looked at some countries. Ruth Glass from England, a British, she actually coined the term gentrification in 1964. And she's a sociologist. And so gentrification has a very sociological perspective. What that means is, you know, in addition to moving people, the impact of moving people, you know, those kinds of things, the feelings and what happens when you move people. They're not just like material, but they are human beings. So there are a lot of factors involved in the movement of people from point A to point B. Britain is one place I looked at. I also looked at movement of gentrification in France. France is unique because while in my opinion, I differ somewhat from Lawrence's, is that it is class. There's a very clear indication, in my opinion, from the research that gentrification has an integral part of the development and expansion of capitalism. So there is a clear correlation in my belief, but it is not just moving people. It is part of it is embedded in a type of ideology. And we say capitalism, it obviously is an ideal type. When you look at what's happening today, one would want to look at the United States and say, is that capitalism, where you have the government intrusion as they are, as in terms of so many type of agencies. And that is exactly the same kinds of things that were done in Cuba. You know, the kind of involvement that they had in terms of the various institutions were similar to what we're doing, but we're doing it under a capitalist framework, and they did it under a communist, socialist framework. So looking at other places as South Africa, gentrification in South Africa. Now that is unique. It's unique because the history of South Africa, as we know, is apartheid, and you know, that is automatically like a false situation. It's not a case of, you know, you want to move or you don't want to move. At one time, you had to move, and up to quite recently, various individuals of color going to South Africa, as you know, had to have a sponsorship to be able to stay or to visit the South African country. So there's a unique situation now after independence. I also looked at Australia, which is interesting because Australia, as you know, developed from a movement of a lot of migrant British people, and automatically they said they emptied the prisons and sent them to Australia. And they have developed a very interesting form of gentrification in terms of the indigenousness with the Aborigines in Australia. So you know, while they moved, the British moved several sets of people from prisons and different forms of reform centers to Australia initially. Now you have a form of gentrification with Australian and the indigenous folks of Australia, the Aborigines. And last place I looked at is India. India, I'm taking India from the standpoint of the Middle East. There's so much to look at as far as gentrification is from that part of the world. The reason for it is that technology has a lot to do with gentrification. So therefore, we have moved, as you know, we have invested, we meaning the United States, they have invested in that population to provide technological change for us in terms of computers, in terms of various kinds of technological devices, so that when you pick up your phone sometimes to get service for your computer, you hear someone say, "My name is Sam," but you know that's not an American accent. So you know exactly where it's coming from. So these are the places that I looked at in terms of international gentrification. Now, the issue of gentrification is based on these cities are sort of a concentric circles from a sociological perspective. Initially, cities were developed in concentric circles. So if you have circles, the inner circle of the city that we now know today, at one time actually was the richest part. And the circles went from the richest to the next, and the last circle, which we may call now, if we look at a concentric circle, we may call it the suburbs. If you look at, and I'm using this for references of what I'm saying, if you look at Maryland, if you look at the outskirts of Maryland, there are pockets of African-American families. And then you wonder, what are you doing out here? Because at one time, the circle, that's where they were. And then you change that whole paradigm around, and then the socioeconomic change, where if you look at Georgetown, at one time, what did you find? African Americans. And then again, that circle changed. Now, you can't buy a house, I cannot buy a house in Georgetown. Maybe Acklin could. That's my friend, by the way. But anyway, the point I'm making is that when you use concentric circles in analyzing the gentrification format, it is developed in certain societies that are more or less British and French oriented. You know, you probably have heard the kinds of issues that are happening, or that happened in France over the last 2 years, where you have a set of migrants from Africa who live in strategic areas you call the third concentric circles, and being actually protesting certain kinds of social injustices. And that is because of the factor of not owning versus renting. So, from a standpoint of what is happening worldwide, I left out one place, Trinidad and Tobago. We have, again, I use Trinidad to represent the Caribbean in terms of gentrification and globalization or international. So what happens when you move people? All kinds of things happen. And why you are able to move people? Because you have control of where they live. So it starts in all of those situations that I have explained or have expressed. It states that in most of those situations you have people who are not owners of their property or their real property. In most cases, they're renters. So regardless if you take it in India is unique because in India is more rigid, it's like South Africa. In India, you have what? The caste system. So the Brahmins obviously would be in a situation in a much more ownership position than the untouchables, okay? So you have a double kind of negative in situations. In our society, we come from the American society, the African or African American, however, Afro-Trinidadian, Afro, whoever, you have a form of caste mentality based on not having the owners control of their settlements. So what I have seen in these studies basically says to me that in systems where you have capitalism or capitalist ideologies, you would have forms of stratification. What is that? That would mean you would always have stratified system. You would find layers of people. You would find stratified on socioeconomic levels from the bottom up to the top. What happens? More than likely, from a sociological perspective, low socioeconomic people are less likely to be owners of their properties. Properties meaning their real properties. So then what happens is when there is a need for development, when the banks and when the developers zero in on an area, maybe dilapidated, maybe for over time wear and tear, the indigenous people in those areas are more likely not to own. So, and that's across the board. But you find differences, as I said, more so stringent in terms of like South Africa versus India, because you have you have caste and class and those kinds of things coming in. In looking at the displacement of these original residents in all of these situations, what the research showed is that in instances where you can get residents to understand the power of ownership, it changes the whole composition. In most cases, you heard about the kibbutz in Israel. Okay, the kibbutz is really a similar kind of process where families come together, and it's extended families, and they decided with whatever you have, you have a tendency to share. And that is also, from a sociological perspective, when you go to these other countries, the lower socioeconomic people is more likely to get a plate of food in a person who is of a low socioeconomic level from country to country than a person of a high socioeconomic level. And the reason for that is the whole sharing mentality is not based on quantity, but is based on sharing. So we do have embedded in our survival, and I say in our because I am from the low socioeconomic, Okay. So we're embedded in our survival, we have the ability to share the scarcity of resources that we have. We have the ability, we have it. So when you come into the house in Trinidad, first thing one's gonna ask you, boy, you want a plate of food? And what does that mean? That doesn't mean that they have a lot of food. It means that the mentality of sharing, or while they eat, and I've never seen anything like it. People don't prepare for 10 people, they prepare for 6, but if 6 people came in after food was prepared, all 10 people would eat. So what does that say? That says that there's something within that social ethic, sharing. And no, but sharing can go further. Sharing goes further into organization. So after this, you organize in terms of ownership. You have situations, and I won't go into the American standpoint. Acklin said you all did a fantastic job last night in terms of looking at San Francisco models and the other models around there. Fantastic models in Brooklyn, in Philadelphia. They're fantastic models. So I'm staying international, but you know what I'm talking. I'm saying, in fact, once those low socioeconomic individuals from country to country move that sharing mentality into the corporate mentality in terms of organizing, then it creates what? It creates a very interesting dimension. What happens? You may have landowners who may become very hostile because of that kind of cooperation. You may have, in certain situations, you may have laws from the legal standpoint that may be passed based on certain conditions that would limit the extent that these individuals may go. So remember what I started off with. I started off by saying that gentrification is an integral part of the development of capitalism. An integral part of capitalism, which means then that we live that what happens then is people then build from one stage to the other to control their economic destiny. Okay. The part of gentrification, beating gentrification then means what? Beating gentrification means the whole concept of from renters to ownership, as I have just tried to explain. And in all these various examples that I gave, the corporation, the cooperatives that were developed showed clearly that that works in terms of getting individuals to cooperate, to join, to have ownership of their particular real estate. The future of gentrification, from a global standpoint, ties in with globalization. The future of gentrification means then, globalization is the concept that we are coming like this. We are coming smaller. Everyone seems to know what everyone is doing, and there's so much interaction. So what is happening with gentrification and globalization around these countries is that technology is creating changes. So you have now pockets of communities where individuals are brought in by various corporations, and then what they do is they have them work over time. I'll give you a good example of one here. Like, for instance, Bethlehem Steel in the United States at one time. They had an ownership of the people's commune. They had an ownership of all of what they do. They were like, the individuals worked, and they controlled all of the resources of the workers. The difference that is happening now with, for instance, in Bangladesh, for instance, you find that there are various kinds of development where indigenous people are able now to pool their resources. For instance, there is a bank for women that they did not allow women to be borrowers of money in Bangladesh, and this concept, beautiful concept, came out where this bank came and is now a model of the world. So what is happening now, the indigenous people, from the globalization standpoint, is able to take their resources and by their proximity or their particular place of living. So, in a nutshell, the question that I want to leave you, and then we can discuss or we can chat as we go along, is what are the benefits of diversity and social inclusion versus market forces and exclusivity? I'll read it again. What are the benefits of diversity and social inclusion versus market forces and exclusivity? What that means is, in a sense of all of gentrification, of all of globalization, of all of the concept of doing something as we are now new, what it is that we need to do to move forward from the concept of, well, we know about race, we know about class, but what do we need to do to advocate that the people who are what we may call as trapped, I'm using Lawrence's word as we discussed earlier, trapped into this day-to-day survival. What can we do in terms of advocating what they can do, what they do on a daily basis, which is sharing, but sharing not only from their standpoint of the minor things that they have, but sharing in terms of their community so that they can have ownership. Thank you.
And visit the store, they would leave books. And so people would come from all over the world just to hang out, and they would leave books. So the bookshelves began to build up with books about Malcolm X, W.B. Du Bois, Cabral, just kind of your entire kind of Sankofa-like deal that was going on. And it was a really friendly kind of cafe. Young people like these young girls would come. Older people was multi-generational. By the time I moved to Brixton, and I used to visit a lot, and so I would go to the store, but by the time I moved to Brixton in 2002, the community was in transition. So one day I go by that bookstore, and it's increasingly becoming, at least the people who are coming to it, it's about half white, half black for the people who are coming. And this is rapidly kind of changing. I come by, say, like a month later, and they're starting to buzz people in, right? So you can't just walk in the store anymore. They're kind of buzzing people in, and it's clear they're buzzing in black people, right? I come by about a month after that, and the bookshelves are gone. They decided, well, you know, people coming in, they're not buying, they're reading the books, blah, 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 right? And then I come back about a month later, and they've changed the name. And it's something like the London Cafe, right? And so you get this transition of this cafe that happens with the transition in Brixton overall. And my point is that gentrification is not just about transformations in housing, it's about transformations in community. And that community centers, community networks, community bonding is broken up by these processes of transformation. So let me frame this in a broader kind of context. I want to argue that we're actually in a period of transformation. And this is what Barack Obama has inherited. The transformation that's happening is that at a global level, the model, the economic and political model that's dominated for the last 40 years or so, it's not working anymore. It's on the verge of complete collapse, and there's a battle that's unfolding over whether to save that model, if it can be saved, or to go with an alternative model. And this is what Obama is finding himself in the middle of, and what we're all experiencing. The crisis we're seeing in state after state after state after state around the world is reflective of this transformation that's happening and the unresolved kinds of issues. Now, earlier this morning, my wife and I were on the Huffington Post, and we were looking at a lot of the reports on these tax teabag things that happened on Wednesday. And first of all, beyond the fact that it's mobilizing the most racist and fascist elements in U.S. society, that is basically not getting played, it's really kind of dangerous. Some of the, there's a whole part on the Huffington Post where there are images, and sign after sign after sign after sign, comparing Obama to Hitler, comparing him to all kinds of horrible things. There's one sign that says Obama equals slavery of white people. All these kind of crazy, kind of insane ways in which people are kind of going after Obama. But mostly they're going after him for what they view as him destroying their livelihood and all of that. The reality is that Obama is probably the best thing that's happened to capitalism in the last 25 years. Because he actually probably has a plan to save the system, or at least to stop it from collapsing from the greed and the kind of unchecked, unmitigated ways in which it's operated for the last 20 years that has brought it to the brink where we're seeing the kind of collapse around the world. In fact, there's a great deal of people who are benefiting in this. Just some figures that I have. In the U.S., you're having increases in the number of billionaires. Now there are over 300 billionaires in the U.S. The combined wealth of the 400 richest Americans is $1 trillion. Of the richest 1% of people in the world, they receive about 57% of all of the wealth in the world. 250 richest individuals in the world own more than the combined wealth of the poorest 2 billion people in the world. These are the people who were the constituents of George W. Bush, for that matter, Bill Clinton, and most of the politicians that have governed the U.S. Around the world. And so everybody's not suffering from this collapse, but the collapse has major ramifications down the road. Now, the concepts that I want to introduce are human security and human insecurity. In 1994, the United Nations, through the UN Development Program, began to challenge notions, conventional notions about what constitutes security. Conventional notions are security means that you're protecting people's property, you're stopping weapons of mass destruction. What they begin to elaborate, and it consolidated into a commission in 2003, I believe, the Human Security Commission, is an alternative view of what constitutes security around the world, meaning that you're taking care of people's needs, basically. You're taking care of people's housing needs, you're taking care of people's economic needs, people's health needs, that real security in society is conditioned on the degree to which the society is actually taking care of people, that doesn't create the circumstances under which you get instability in society. So it's been an evolving concept that's developed into a global movement. I'm going to pass around a couple of documents. One is a project that I'm working with called Human Security Project, Human Security Global Project, and we put out a couple of reports. This is the latest looking at the alternative to human security is insecurity, and what happens when states and cities are falling apart. And so we've just done a report looking at different cities around the world and the function of insecurity as ways in which these cities are falling apart. And there's a piece in there on Washington, D.C. that I and a couple other people did to put D.C. within a global context, that if what's happening in D.C. isn't just framed by the local conditions, but local, regional, national, and international conditions. And Washington, D.C. is unique in many ways in that you have these four overlapping, complementary and contradictory circles of power, where the international, where you have the World Bank and IMF, the national power through Congress, through Supreme Court, regional power through the ways in which Maryland and Virginia played major roles in the construction of D.C. How many of you guys know what percentage of jobs in D.C. are held by people from Maryland and Virginia? Large. It's overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And so that fundamentally constructs the way in which D.C. is able to function and to operate. And so you have these conflicting circles of power. And so within that, we frame how we look at D.C. And then a second document called Inclusive Human Security that we developed through Trans-Africa that we presented to the Obama administration when it came in to look at alternative ways to begin to approach questions of security and not just kind of follow what has been a traditional path that D.C. has. Now, my own area of expertise is not specifically around gentrification, but in broader sense looking at issues of poverty, issues of racism, issues of human rights. Going back to Brixton, London has been going through the kind of transformation that we're starting to see in other parts of Europe as well, i.e. the social democratic model that, that Lawrence talked about that evolved after World War II is on the brink as well. And there's a major debate raging in Europe about whether it's sustainable or not, that's very much tied into issues of immigration and increasing number of people of color who've come to Europe. And we're seeing the construction of these suburbs where you have, because gentrification in housing is tied to labor and to labor needs and to labor availability. And what we see in DC with the construction, the redefinition of suburbs. For a lot of us, when we grew up, suburbs had a whole different meaning than what suburbs mean now. Suburbs, when we grew up in the 70s, 60s, 70s, were the places where opportunities were for people who had made it big in the cities, who no longer wanted to be in the cities and wanted to be in areas where they had more green grass and housing and better schools and all of that. That's been reconstructed to now these are basically Bantustan's, and people who are living in the suburbs are finding that they're now having to come to the city in many ways, what we saw in South Africa for decades, but this is what we're seeing in many countries and cities around the world. So this is what's happening in London, is that Brixton actually was outside of central London. If you look at a map, Brixton is on the other side of the Thames. The Thames is sort of kind of the barrier, and inside of that is really the central city. London, which is the most expensive city to live in the world, had that cutoff. But beginning in the early 2000s, as it became more and more impossible to live inside of the central city, people began to move to these other areas. In Brixton, which had been off limits, it was essentially the Harlem of London, and similar to what has happened to Harlem in New York, it was gentrified. And people began to move to Brixton, and you begin to not hear accents from Trinidad or from Ghana, but from Bosnia, from Spain, from all the other areas in Europe where people were starting to migrate over, as well as British accents, and people were coming from Birmingham and Lancaster and other parts of the UK. And so you get a model that's unfolding that often appears to be unique, but in fact is very consistent with the global transformation and the global breakdown of economics that we're seeing, and when that's manifesting itself on a whole range of vectors, including the racial dimension. So let me leave it here, pass it on.
Some years ago, because the plans were to take, you see, up on the mountains, you can now look out at the ocean and have the beautiful views. And gentrification is not just U Street. I don't want us to have gentrification as simply U Street and 125th Street. Gentrification is a threat to our ecology and our environment. Gentrification is a threat to our history, our historical association of what the things that we have done over time. We have to understand what are the implications of that. Finally, we also have to understand that gentrification is the import and export of culture. It is the import and export of culture because people come for this same conference in Trinidad. They're having a huge carnivalesque kind of thing. And the band that won, the two carnival bands that won this year in Trinidad in their carnival, just before the conference. You see, these things are shipwreck agreement and all them are preparations for this conference. This conference didn't fall out of the sky because Barack Obama came into office and wanted to have, or the Prime Minister of Trinidad wanted to have it there because we have oil and natural gas. No, they selected two bands. One was a white boy named McFarlane, who had the band that won the Carnival Band of the Year on all the things, playing Africa. So a white boy's imagination and interpretation of Africa is what we pass on to all the people who came to the conference. And the same thing, a white steel band. We're bringing people from Sweden and Switzerland in the band, won the competition this year by half a point. The band that didn't even come in the top 5 in the semifinals, didn't beat all the other great bands, Boogsy and Desperados and all that. They won this year because it was close to. That's what gentrification is. The Hyatt Regency and the other hotels, the Marriott and all that, needed that. And they're the ones performing. So it is something that you have to take seriously in terms of what it means to us. Not what it means to me personally, but what are the implications for people that look like us? What are the implications of these monumental events? And what do they mean? How do we live with an Ivory Coast in which less than 5% of the people in Ivory Coast are Catholics? And a president, Houphouët Boigny, builds a Catholic cathedral that is so huge. I mean, how do we live with that and consider that, don't see that as part of the gentrified reality when we have leadership like that? So the gentrification rests in the hands of not only us, but our bankrupt leadership and our corrupt leadership and our corrupt educators who refuse to take on gentrification as a challenge. And just as we did not take on poverty in the primaries or in the election in this country, and we talked only about middle class aspiration, in the same way we have not taken on gentrification or poverty in the countries all over the world until we begin to find ourselves confronted with new people like Chavez and the resistance of people like Fidel and people like Morales and people like Subcomandante Marcos. It is in that world and not in Victoria's Secrets that we will find the reality of what gentrification means. Thank you very much.
Move you make is compared to the right way to do it. And who has the right way to do it? The West, the white West has the right way to do it. So anything that you're doing is going to be called backwards or substandard or less human, less civilized. So if we're internationally facing a situation where we think that we are less civilized than the right white, we can be manipulated any kind of way that they want to manipulate us because we don't have a base from which to plan an alternative. Because we're always saying that what we have is not worth it. So I think if we're going to say, let's say, where are we going to go from here? Let's start with definitions. Let's start with really looking at, and I think that's the benefit of calling it an international, looking at internationally. Let's look at how this thing does manifest internationally so we can really call it what it is, which is an advanced state of neo-colonial racism.
You know, you talk to people, you see them on the bus, and they say, oh yes, white people are taking over. People know and people see this, ordinary people, because I ride the bus, and, you know, I have occasions to talk to people. But, you know, they say that and there's a shrug of their shoulders. It's like, they're taking over, they're taking over, they're taking over. And no one has tapped into that level of awareness. But I see it as just brazen theft and robbery. That's what it is. I wouldn't dress it up even with colonialism.
Maybe we call it piracy.
Well, that's it. Now, when Professor Lynch was speaking, I thought of the pirates because I support the pirates. I lit 3 candles for those 3 teenagers who were murdered, as far as I was concerned, in cold blood, and I lit another candle the next day for the people who commandeered a ship to show the world how they're dumping toxic waste. Now, I mean, we laugh at this, but they've been complaining about the abuse of their territorial waters since 1991 to the UN. Not one person on the mainstream media, and I looked at it purposely, mentioned one word, no discussion whatsoever, black or white. I mean, they didn't even go there. They didn't go there. So that is not what I call the audacity of hope, and it's certainly not change that I can believe in.
You have a second mic over here for this half. Let me turn it on one second.
Uhuru. My name is Asafo Yellow Dean. I'm a member of the Uhuru movement as well as the chair of the African Liberation Day Committee in D.C. And, you know, it may have just been me, but, you know, even in the discussion, you know, it seemed like, you know, we lost, you know, it may have just been me, but that we got lost, you know, that, you know, gentrification or whatever we want to call it, you know, isn't just some things, you know, where, you know, our people say that we want to leave a community and then some people just come in, you know, but it's a direct effect, you know, of the powerlessness and the poverty, you know, in our community, where, you know, somebody else can come and say, you know, raise your, the price of your house, or raise the price of your electricity, or raise the price of something, you know, and force you to leave your home, or, you know, make the neighborhood that you live in have no viable economy, except maybe an illegitimate drug economy, you know, and so you have to move somewhere else to get a job, you know, and even when we talk about the gentrification issue, especially like in places like DC, you know, it's interesting because, you know, at the time of this economic crisis and imperialism, parasitic capitalism having its crisis, that, you know, white people are more and more desperate to move into the city because that's where the economy is, and African people are being taken away into suburbs, where there's less economy, and less transportation to get to an economy. So it's very interesting, even in that effect. But also, another thing that I wanted to bring up that I didn't hear, and most people don't even often think of it as gentrification, is our people from, in Africa being forced to move away from our homeland, into America, into Europe, because our resources are constantly being taken away by America and by Europe, for white people's benefit. So we're, leaving our homes, leaving our resources, and that are being taken from us and having to chase after them, which is the same, same thing. It's still gentrification, even though it's not, for the same reasons, it's still the forced dispersal of our people, and I believe, as I believe the brother said, when we talk about the solution, we really need to be able to talk about, getting our resources back, and getting organized and identifying as African people, so that we can, get control of these resources, so nobody can tell us, where we have to be or where we should live or something like that. That's the trajectory we have to be on, because anything outside of that, it limits us, to being, told what to do or being subjugated, on where to live or how to go about this by the same people who are telling us where to live now. So, Uhuru.
To say as a young person, probably one of the reasons why it's so difficult for us to even, a lot of my friends probably don't even know what gentrification truly is, and I didn't either until I came here. And I think that that's one of the issues, is the fact that a lot of us aren't educated on these types of things and what it truly is, like identifying gentrification for what it truly is. A lot of people from my generation, I don't even think have even a true deep understanding of what racism is. I think we have like a broad idea of it, but because we don't truly really know it, I don't think that a lot of the times they can pinpoint it even as it becomes more subtle. So I feel as though teaching black history and us becoming more aware of these things, sitting in these types of meetings, is going to help with the movement, because a lot of the times you just hear, the problems and you dismiss it and you just keep going forward, and you're like the lady was saying on the bus, oh, well, we see the white people are coming in. That's the way it is. That's the way it always been, and they keep on moving. And I think that we dupe ourselves into believing that we're powerless. And so because we start to see ourselves as powerless, we allow those who we deem as powerful to continue to weaken, to take our power from us. So until we can recognize that we are the ones who can save ourselves, and I think about Malcolm X and his ideals of black nationalism, one of the things that I take from what he was saying was, we understand what the problem is, what is it? You were talking about white supremacy is an issue. However, we can't look to those people in that position to save us. We have to look to ourselves, and that means supporting our black-owned businesses. That means, as I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Aile was saying yesterday about training people in the basements and coming together and pulling our resources so that we can once again take our own power and start living the lives that we want to live.
I want to make a quick microphone. Anti-technology, the anti-technology guy.
Yes. You have so much technology and no soul.
Yes. Why are you recording yourself?
We have a great deal of technology and an absence of soul. Let's go ahead. I am concerned about this. when the 930 Club moves from downtown F Street, collapses on F Street downtown, and it moves up to wherever that street is by Howard University, what? Beach Street. The 930 Club takes off as an instrument of gentrification and uses reggae, hip-hop, and popular culture to begin to fuse so that it becomes necessary for that whole neighborhood to have what? New apartment buildings and new houses and new condominiums. With no impact by Howard University or the dormitories that are there, and no discussion of what is taking place in that small space run by the 930 Club. As a matter of fact, round the corner, some black people had tried to open a club. It didn't work. It collapsed. Let's take that as one. So here we are, attracted. This is what consumption, as I say, we recolonized by consumption. By the 930 Club, we all went up in there to hear Brazilians, to hear Senegalese, to hear local hip-hop people. Everybody came through, and Chuck Brown, and you name it, all right? Fast forward. Bus Boys and Poets provides the same thing. It takes the same middle-class black community, the Howard University student, and it takes 14th Street. And now there's what? Through the coffee house, through the restaurant. So I went yesterday over to Vertigo Books that used to be on Connecticut Avenue because I wanted to get a book. Vertigo is closing down. Vertigo closed down on Connecticut. And then it's closing down over by the University of Maryland, next to a university with 40,000 people. A bookstore is closing down. Hear what I'm telling you? So I want you to understand the resiliency of Sankofa. You understand that now, eh? What it means to stay here. Because Georgia Avenue is going to be transformed. Can't get away from it. And Howard University will have nothing to do with it. I know that. From your opening remarks, I could tell you how you look like one. I could tell you how it's. So what I want to say is, so that Bus Boys and Poets and 930 Club are extension, are very essential elements. I was talking about Woodbrook in Trinidad. They are very essential experiments or aspects of the you understand what I'm saying? Of the gentrification process. And they use the tools of Bob Marley, of reggae, of Rasta, of Lux, of every damn thing. And we say what? We go in there and we like it. And everybody comes through there, even though they are mistreated. Amiri Baraka was telling me how mistreated he was when he went there to read. Brothers who come out of Southeast and go there tell me how mistreated they are. But you know what? We still go all the time, including you.
I'm at Sankofa.
I know you're Sankofa today. You know.
No, actually, this sister, don't mess with her. I'm going to mess with you. This young sister, look, I know many Howard. How many people are from Howard here? How many? Look, hey, Acklin. Look, how many people from, excuse me, 1 second. No, 1 second. How many people from Howard? Look, these are the miracle. These are, to me, they are so important they're here. They could have gone where you talked about. They could have gone, and they could have gone to the fashion show. They're here. These are the precious ones.
Thank you.
And as far as I'm concerned, Askia, you, and me are all hogs. They are the folks who are going to run with the baton. So respecting these young folks. Don't be messing with them because I will punch you. I will punch you like I did last time in your own basement.
And you know what I have to say as a result of that? I must say this very well, because the churches that once provided for us community are now going into the suburbs
Well, that's where their congregations are.
Now, as a graduate of Howard, I'm predicting here that in 10, 15 years, Howard and UDC will end up in Virginia and Maryland because they are irrelevant to gentrification. Therefore, when you come back as a graduate of Howard, I want you to ask yourself, what did that do?
Hey, brother, go ahead.
All right, I just
This
like...
sister is like, why don't you moderate right? Don't be scared of Ackland.
All right, I'd like to follow up and tie in a couple of things, especially what Askia said, and get at some remedies since we have discussed the issues and the problem, and I think it's been properly defined. And I think the remarks have been cogent and very, very relevant. The concept of whatever you want to call it, that somebody comes and however they do it, whether it's legally or by faith or whatever, take your land or your property and then move on it. As Askia said, you know, did you come here to join us or replace us? And then the key to the whole thing is they make you think it's something wrong with you.
That's right.
After they took your whatever it was.
That's right.
It's your fault. You're guilty in some form. So to get at a remedy, because I think that's the crux of how all this starts. I mean, how can people get treated this way and then believe something's wrong with them after somebody took what belonged to them historically? It's just, and so I guess the question is what remedies need to be put in place to, whether it's the God presence, or what is it going to take to give one first the identification of the self-identity, to understand that this is mine and this is worth fighting, and I need other people of like minds to join and think the same way, and to defend. And it takes me back to Cuba, which is the CDRs, which is the Committee to Defend the Revolution. Okay, and each bloc was organized on that basis. And that's one of the reasons why the U.S. did not attack Cuba, because they knew that every single bloc was organized under the CDRs down to every man and woman and child on that bloc. And there was a doctor on every block. He knew who went to school, he knew who was hungry. I mean, it was so organized that it just, when you start thinking about it, and they don't have that problem. Then the other thing that really got me the different times that I've been there is that the children put on all the events.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, the children organized the events, put all the literature together. When Castro was going to speak, this is when Fidel was still the leader. The children would introduce him. They did everything. And then you sit down and talk to them. They weren't running around. They were very polite. They didn't have a bunch of sugar in their system. You know, they listened to you and they spoke to you. I mean, and it was like, it took me back to when I was a child, that, you know, your parents made sure when an adult spoke to you, sat there and listened, and you dare not move or say anything. Okay? So anyway, but back to this remedy, and I think Cuba is a model that we need to look at for a whole bunch of things. But specifically in terms of how they organized every block, and every block had a mentality that they were going to defend that block and defend everyone in that block for health care, for education, for personal development. In other words, the block became the community. And then I just want to say this and I'll quit. And this including Mr. Obama. They keep saying that Cuba is a dictatorship, and Cuba is a communistic government, and Cuba has no democracy. Well, I've been to Cuba many times, all right? I represented Pastors for Peace, and that was an organization made up of 250 denominational churches around the world. And they got together after, under the Clinton administration, they really jacked up the embargo where they denied food and medicine to Cuba. And that was the only place on the planet that had been denied food and medicine. Vietnam got it, North Korea got it, China got it, and by the way, they trade with all these people. Anyway, everybody got it except Cuba. So the churches came together, organized, and sent these yellow school buses all over the United States. People became known as caravanistas who got on the bus, picked up the food and the medicine, all huddled down in Texas, and which was my character, Texas, and they would wait for customs to clear them. And this is where I came in and a bunch of people like me, notwithstanding that I have gone to Cuba many times. What took place was that customs, through the Treasury Department, through OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, what they did was they would hold them up for sometimes a week, sometimes 3 or 4 days. They would sometimes threaten them, sometimes they wouldn't do anything, and then in the wee hours of the night, they let them through. All right, and this went on for 15 years. And every time they did this, we said, well, why don't you charge these people, and let's go to court, and let's fight it out. Never got charged. It was always this drama, year after year, and they're still doing it to this day, okay? So, but I'm saying when you go to Cuba and you look at the model, and there's a lot of other things that's very interesting about that model, but the key one is that they don't feel that there's something wrong with them defending their block. Okay, and to me, what is it going to take to get that here?
That's interesting what you had said about what is it going to take for us to be prepared to defend our blocks. And right here in D.C., we got a whole lot of folks that are prepared to defend their blocks. They're just prepared to defend their blocks for the wrong reason. We have a standing militia right here in the District of Columbia. The problem is we don't have any leadership, any way to direct the thinking of those young people who are armed and ready to defend their blocks and their neighborhoods, lead them in the right direction. And I was thinking about what you had said about that kind, because we talked about that yesterday, that kind of apathy where people, don't want to hear what you have to say. I've learned through my own just personal living experience, I just say what I have to say and move on. If people take the information in, more power to them. They'll pursue it, but I'm not going to waste my time on somebody who won't listen to me when I can spend that time talking to someone who will. And but also I think it's really significant that we only have 2 young people here from Howard, when we have all those thousands of young people across the street. And I think it's a bit sad that I do believe that the majority of us sitting in here belong to the same generation I belong to. And I've always I spend a lot of time around young people. And I've taken the position that I'm just here to tell you what I know. Because I don't have a whole lot of energy to get involved in a whole bunch of physical stuff. But I sure can let you drain my brain so I can tell you what I've done, what I've learned, what worked, what didn't, what we tried, and what is not new and what folks are prepared for. But the thing that makes it very difficult for me not to throw my hands up in the air and just focus on tiny groups of young people and say, I'm going to do what I can do with them to make my difference, is that it seems to me that those who clearly refuse absolutely to give up control, and who have managed to adapt and adjust themselves through all of these centuries in order to maintain minority control. I wonder if they are fully prepared to blow this earth up before they relinquish control.
They are.
And we have to realize we're dealing with people who are mad. These people are mad. You cannot live in the world the way, they're mad. You cannot live in the world the way they're living in the world, wanting to have everything for themselves. And yet, they have to have dogs and guards and guns and all sorts of security bells and whistles in order to exist. It's a form of madness that we exist in now. But what I wanted to get back to was, we are organizing people. If you look at the history of our movement that has enabled many of us to get where we are now. What has happened is that we are no longer vigilant. We've stopped organizing. We are afraid of our children. And the apathy is not just with our children. We need to not fall into this generational segregation. It is cross age groups, intergenerational, multi-generational. You know, we have as many adults as just as backward and apathetic and dim-witted as some of the young people. There is no conceptual binary there, adult-child. No opposition whatsoever, you see. So what we need to do is to recognize that we have stopped building our institutions. Haki Madhubuti says it whenever I hear him speak, and he's done it. A lot of other people, Haile and his wife, they've done it. They're moving on. And we have a public university right here in the District of Columbia that I'm sure a lot of people have contempt for, you know, that, you know, they could care less. They've forgotten that the university is for the underserved. It's for high achievers and low achievers. But a coup d'etat has just, hopefully won't be successful. We are working on it, you see. We are working on it, and we have to embrace that institution. We must fight for it. Howard must help us to fight for it. Because it's not a question of it moving somewhere. It's going to, the plan is to transform it, to make it suitable for the elite, okay? And to create these community college bantutsins around in the wards for our people. Let me give you a little small vignette. Happened at Busboys and Poets. The other week, I went to view the Bloods and Crips documentary. And this woman was sitting, and they had a little piece of paper on the table, and, you know, what's the solution, blah, blah, blah. So our table, I'm the only black at the table. So I said, well, what is your solution? She says, you know, the recreation centers are wonderful. Now I can walk there. I says, where do you live? She says, Turkey Thicket, Turkey Thicket. They really fixed it up nice. And everybody goes there. You know who the everybody is. All the black men. Because she said, I can now walk down the street. Okay? If we start walking in this town, if black people start walking in this town, and even if they go and just have a sit down in the parks, because as you know, our parks have been taken over with people walking their dogs. Right in front of Mary McLeod Bethune, over where I live, you see. I asked one woman, I think it's Morey School by that park, and I said, well, do you all go up there? She said, sometimes we go in groups. And you see him on, and I said, you know, I talked to this guy, people, Rivlin and them on Kojo Namni about this. You know, I called in and I says, look, I was born and raised in this town. We would walk all the way from Northeast, what you call Capitol Hill, all the way to GW and go to their medical museum, to the monument. We'd roam all over this town. They've used crime as a pretext to get us off the street. They've used the homeless to create all kinds of provisions and regulations. You can't be in the park after 6. You know, if you walk in Georgetown, you know, you're suspect. Even if you walk down Maryland Avenue, where I live. We have got to take ownership of the streets again. We're not walking. Everybody is just in their cars, running to their houses, locking their doors. We have to stop being afraid of our kids. We've got to stop being afraid of each other. We've got to start speaking to each other and getting back to our communal social relationships. Those have been broken. They are broken down because we allowed it. That's it for me. Thank you.
I've got a couple of thoughts regarding solution. And forgive me for being focusing so much on individual. I would say as a class, it's get back to the bush. I was in Durban, which is in KwaZulu, portion of South Africa, Azania. And interesting phenomena. I won't go into the South African phenomena, but there, the phenomena that I observed, and I was with a brother who was actually affiliated with the Nation of Islam. We were riding around in his car. He had an SUV or something. I mean, I usually ride a bike. And he was educated, nice brother. But it's like I said, brother, you need to go back to the bush. Because and the reason I say that is because if you look at Africa and us from Africa, probably, you can see it in Europe, Portugal, and other places where women carry things on their heads. It is the most efficient manner of carrying things because the weight is distributed through your body and it's not on your arms, it's not on your back. It is a very efficient way. But if you get a black woman, I mean, unfortunately men weren't taught that way, but that's another question, discussion. But you get a black woman who comes from the bush and goes to school and lives in the West, could you ever see her going to the laundromat in her condominium with her laundry on her head? No, she left that in the bush and does not want someone to think she's from the bush. And I think this is how we've left so many things behind. So now you see people, pharmacologists and PhDs studying the ways of the, as they're called, witch doctor, to get these remedies because they're remedies, they work, so that they can put them into the modern textbooks and what have you, taking them from the people. So I say these are the things that we own, that my grandmother used to make root beer. It's like, in Mississippi. And now, it's Hires and A&W. So, and I have to confess that growing up, I just didn't get it. I thought store-bought was better than homemade. And I think we have a tendency of thinking that. And the final thing I'll say with that, back to the bush concept, don't get me started on jump in our SUV, drive to Blockbuster, I guess there's no more Blockbuster, to get a movie and, burn all that gas, as opposed to walking. But we will go to the supermarket, we'll take our time looking for what we want, shopping, and then, because we're in such a big hurry to check out, we'll go to the automatic checkout lane. Well, that's a job that somebody used to have. I personally refuse to go to the automated checkout. I don't care how long the other lines may be. I'm a member of a union, and I'm going to support a job.
That's right.
We, in the same way, on a larger scale, because things are cheaper there, we'll go to Walmart. We'll go to some of these other big box discount stores because we want stuff, and it's cheaper rather than going to places that use union-made products or have higher standards of employees. Walmart employees are the biggest class of employed persons on Medicare, Medicaid that is, on welfare, because they can't work more than 32 hours a week, which is less than full time, and they don't have any benefits. So they all go to the county where they live to be supported medically. That's a tax on the rest of the society in order so that we can get cheap stuff. And so I'll finish by saying this. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us, and I heard Minister Farrakhan expand on what it really meant, that we had a dietary law in the Nation of Islam. Somebody said something about a bean pie and everybody will laugh. Aha, bean pie. The brothers selling the bean pies. It's a joke. That's because we let it go that way. But the dietary law, when I came into the nation, the idea was we would only buy and eat kosher food. We would only go to certain stores, and we wouldn't purchase something from a place that served khanzir or haram products or forbidden products. We would only go, now they have halal store down here in Georgia Avenue that were halal, that are permitted. part of the reason for that, the value of that, and Minister Farrakhan explained that if you have a dietary law, that is, you are required by some sense of law to obey this, then you will only shop among people who are your kind. This is one of the reasons that if you know, that before the breakdown of the Jewish kind of, when they had a dietary law. And so they would only buy certain products, which meant that they would spend their money with their own merchants rather than with everybody or anybody. And so I'm just suggesting that in that respect, you know, not to impose a dietary law, but just to say, you know, to that the consciousness about what's the sacrifice? Do we save a few bucks by going to Walmart and destroy a local economy, or can we consciously and try to raise the consciousness among others to patronize those who are supporting us? And those who are supporting us, as in the old days when the businesses supported the students and the Jackson State, the history of the Freedom Democratic Party of Mississippi, it was the Masonic Hall that gave the Freedom Democratic Party a place to meet right across the street from Jackson State, because they didn't have to answer to anybody. Couldn't nobody tell them, you can't meet here because this is ours. And we say who comes and who leaves. So if we have that sense of support for those merchants who support us, and the merchants then also give back to the community, we have a, you know, we can build a community that's not just replaced by people like Walmart who want stuff, and customers who want cheaper stuff, or who want to go to the automated checkout line because we want to save 3 minutes and get out of the store quicker to go back, as they say in the TV commercials, to get on with our lives, whatever that is.
So where do we go from here? I just want to...
I just wanted to put one thing out there for you guys to look at, and it's called Berkshares.org. Basically, the Berkshire community in Massachusetts have created like their own monetary system, and I wanted to see if we can kind of do that for our own community. So what happens is it helps the local businesses, so that if you have the monetary fund that they've created, you can go to the local businesses and use that. What happened was the businesses came together, including a lot of the banks, to help out the community. So this is one option that we can look at to kind of save our community. I can't speak too much on it because I'm still researching it, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Also, they have some in North Carolina and Missouri.
Yeah. They have in the state of Washington too.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is my mind. That was my mindset. The issue of, you know, we have so much information, we hear so much. I'll give you just a little synopsis of some things that I did in the mid-70s at the University of Buffalo. You know, one of the things about communication is levels. So there are some feel-good levels, there are some emotional levels, and there's some concrete levels. So being there, done that, it's almost like saying, you know, where are we on those levels? And I'm so glad that you mentioned it. The question of, as I stated, in the 70s, mid-70s, at the University of Buffalo, you know, we as black faculty, we decided to create a black studies department. You could imagine now, this is 1976, creating a black studies department. University of Buffalo, if you don't know, is a predominantly white university. What we decided to do, the reason why I'm saying this is for most of the young people here to understand that you're going to have challenges, but just go ahead and leave here with an idea that you can do something. If it means in terms of this whole gentrification of organizing individuals, the basis for it, as we said in the whole discussion, is rent versus ownership. clear as day. If you're renting, you're under control. If you own, you have control. So what in fact happens, let me go back to the 70s, we decided we're going to come up with a Black Studies department, University of Boston. We had no concept of, or we had nothing before us in terms of courses. So we created courses like Black English, Black Religion, Black Family. Could you imagine we doing this? We took buses from Buffalo, going to New York, going to Harlem, get books, self-taught, and we start teaching people these things. Now, the concept here is very interesting. Teaching Black religion, as I created a course. Ron Kowinga had a book, Black Religion, and I had a dialogue with Ron before Kwanzaa, and he's saying, he came up with a concept of Kwanzaa. Now this is before, could you imagine we talking about Kwanzaa then, coming up, and look at what Kwanzaa is now, okay? So my point is that the issue of gentrification is organization. You might know of a block, as you said, rightly so, knocking on doors and telling people, we need to, you renting, we need to get some, we need to own this property, especially properties that are more in a dilapidated state, because those are the properties that change hands. So, in a nutshell, what I love information, but I usually, and I'll be honest with you, I get frustrated with hearing some of the things that you say now. I've been hearing it since in the 70s. You know, and there's nothing wrong with, no, please understand me. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with hearing it, but please understand that it is important to move forward. You know, where do you go from here? It's almost like the Martin Luther King book, you know, strive towards freedom. Where do we go from here? The question is, and I am of the mindset that we have so much information, which is great, but we need organization of that information and make it productive. Because as much as we want, as much as we can say, and remember the word I said, we have levels of highs. We want to get emotional high, we want to feel good high, we want to get constructive high. You know, Sankofa, it's constructive high because this is here. So as an example, and you know, sometimes we look so far away for examples, but you look at our faces as we sit and understand where we are and look at the place we are. So therefore, we don't have to like look beyond the street. We can look right. It's almost like in families. You're right within, the issues are right facing you, but you're looking beyond. So I appreciate sharing that, especially with the young folks, in terms of ideas and moving forward. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Frank John. I own a real estate appraisal business I've had for the better part, almost 20 years now. So I've had the opportunity really up close to see the transformation of a lot of these different neighborhoods. And I'm reminded of fairly recently sitting down with one of our elders on Capitol Hill. And sat down, he invited me to sit down at his kitchen table. And he shared with me a little bit about his story. He might have been in his late 70s, maybe early 80s. And he talked about his grandparents being the first black people on that particular block on Capitol Hill. And then the transformation which happened, and then consistently for generations, it became a solid black block. And at the time, I'm having this discussion with this elder. He's now the last black person on that particular block. But he said he was committed to stay. and he was refinancing so he could lower his payments and stay in that space. But it was just so dramatic, you know, the transformation that he's seen and his family's seen in his lifetime. I want to ask a question of really any one of the esteemed panel. I was reading Black Agenda Report. How many folks are familiar with blackagendareport.com by, I guess, Brother Glenn Ford is the editor. It's outstanding, cutting-edge political analysis. And on the site, he has an interview with a sister who is head of the Harlem Tenant Association, and talking about the gentrification process in Harlem and how this current economic collapse has caused a number of the gentrifiers to lose their properties. Some of them are in foreclosure. Some of these folks that have had deals with Bloomberg to take over 1,000-unit apartment buildings, convert those to luxury condominiums, they're now in default. And so in the interview, and again, I think it's still up on the site so you can hear it in its entirety, she's talking about how this whole process within Harlem, at least, has been slowed down by the economic troubles that some of these folks are incurring. And so the question to really any one of the esteemed panel is, do you anticipate or do you think that what we're going through now is going to have any kind of lessening of this gentrification or colonization process here or in any other places around the world?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Uhuru, and good evening to everybody. One thing, whenever I come to Sankofa, you know, I'm always appreciative of the environment, and before me, a lot of people had mentioned supporting our own community and the like. But I wanted to quote one of the greatest African artists, Fela Anikulapo Kuti. He put it in the best way and very simple, and he said, suffer for all, now your fault be that. May I say, now your fault be that. Just to translate, he's saying that all the suffering in the world, especially for Africans, you know, is our fault. You know, I mean, this top-down mentality that has really afflicted our community, whether it's here or in the motherland, where we choose, you know, very reactionary imams or priests or political, put people in political office, and they get to a certain point and they think that they're doing us a favor. When we're the ones, you know, who chose the imam, we're the one who chose the priests or the political officials. And they end up doing whatever they want to do to us. I mean, serious retrogression, you know, of our societies, you know, like abject poverty and misery. And then we just sit down and accept it. That's what I think the problem is. So the solution has to be that African people have to have the audacity to tell the imam, look, we are the ones who put you here, or the priest or the political official, that if you don't perform as we desire, we have the authority to kick you out of the mosque or the church or the, as a mayor or president or anything. And I think this is what's been lacking. And the reason why we cannot operate, you know, in this manner is that this organization has really overwhelmed our consciousness. You know, every time when we hear the best sons and daughters of the continent, you know, we hear the phrases, organization is the solution, you know, which is true. But then, when we allow people that we look up to for solutions, and then they just treat us any which way they want, you know, that becomes a problem. So I think, you know, right now in this time, you know, which is the best, I think this is the best period for African people all over the world to really organize, and throw this monkey off our backs. And the only way we're gonna have to accomplish this task, is to, unite amongst ourselves. That we are an African people. You can't be two things at the same time. They ain't nothing like African American or or hyphenated, or truncated history. We cannot truncate our history. So we have to come up, with this one Africa, one nation, and that's the only solution for us as an African people. Because wherever you look on this planet Earth, we go through the same wretchedness, and the current myth and euphoria that Obama is going to solve our problem, I'm telling you, man, most of us are in for a big disappointment, because that ain't going to happen, man.
Thank you.
It ain't going to happen. So we're challenging, all Africans, whether you belong to one organization or not, that this African Liberation Day, we're putting out the call for one Africa, one nation, where we want all African organizations, Africans with talents, whether you are a filmmaker, or you are a scientist, you are an agronomist, we want people to come and bring your program. Let's challenge each other. Like the sister was saying, that we are afraid of ourselves and afraid of our children. Come on, let's, as an organization, this is what we have been saying. We always invoke the name of Marcus Garvey, King, and all these great Africans. And nobody has replicated what Garvey had done, almost 40 years ago. And I think we have the ability to do it. So we are inviting people, this African Liberation Day is from the 22nd to the 24th at the Carlos Rosario Charter School. It's on 1110 Harvard Street Northwest. So we're calling on all the community, come on out, one Africa, one nation, Uhuru. Uhuru.
No, before, if there is anybody that hasn't asked questions or comments, please take the mic now, and we will let the panel answer the question afterwards, if you don't mind.
We want to get some people that haven't spoken yet, but we haven't forgotten your question.
Or hopefully they have.
It's for the mic, so we can.
I go to Howard University. I'm a mathematics and philosophy major. And I have a few thoughts. This is evacuation, it's extinction, and I have a few questions that I just want to put out there. What do we have? What do we know we have? What do they want? And at what price will they pay for this? The time for an alliance is here, and the time for Pan-Africanism, this is the moment. What Nkrumah was talking about, what everyone was talking about, is now. So many people have left home, are never going back, but they still face the same problem. Africa is more than just the place, as we see through the story of what has happened in this country. If I ask everybody in this room to call forth their ancestors way back, I met my great-grandmother at the age of 6. She saw her mother, and her mother saw her mother, her mother, her mother, all the way back. So if the eyes are the soul, then I've seen the world. I've seen the history of the whole experience. To me, the moment is now. We have the tools, we have the internet. We have the tools to come together and really at least have this online. It doesn't have to be right now or tomorrow that we'll see the change, but this is a step. There are too many voices that need to contribute. And when the right voices contribute, somebody is gonna do something. I feel like my parents are from Ghana, and I was back home a few years back, and this gentrification thing is just deep and it's systemic. Schools, roads that are being built, hotels that are moving into the continent, in terms of why would you have a school and focus on students passing the SAT? Every student back home is planning for the SAT, not the West African examination exam, but the SAT. Visas are now being granted than ever before, and more people are moving in as people move out. When you return into a hotel, go to the village, look for your mom and your aunt, and that's it. So it's 100% in the effect. It's not even just like here where it has this gradual process. It's already there. And it's a lot of people living in exile economically. People don't want to go back home. What am I going home for? You know, I have 2 aunts who've been outside of Ghana for over 30 years. They've missed their mother, grandmother, grandfather's funeral, you know, because they don't want to go back home. Now, they don't have a reason to go back home. There's no home to go to in terms of, you know, physical home, community. So the Pan-African idea is now. The idea of we being Africans wherever we stand, beyond just where we are in terms of this is the Africa, this is the continent. The continent is us. The culture of Africa traveled through our genes and came to this country and has gone all over the world. So the Pan-African idea is now, and it will always be now. Whether you are African from the continent or you're African wherever you are Pan-African. So we all need to come together and get away from this, I am this, I am that, I am this, I am that. We are African. You know, and that's why I said we should go back and call all our ancestors. Whether you know them or you don't know them, you call them, they know themselves. And that speaks to who we are. So for me, the idea of this very place of Sankofa, which is an Akan word, which happens to be who my parents are, resonates so well with me because I understand exactly what it means. And there are about 10 different scenarios that you could use that word to have the exact same meaning. You could just say that word and it means go back until you get it. Don't come back if you don't understand what I asked you to go get. It's not necessarily about just turning your back and just going, but it's about going to reclaim who you are. So we have to reclaim who we are as Africans by assuming the position of being Pan-African. And that to me is the greatest step that we could take to really go against this tide of this global invasion. So I say Pan-African has come and we have to do it. I'm working on a website called AU Citizens, and where we could really connect and just have this discussion all over the world. There are too many people who were stranded. I met a man called Moses 10 years ago in Italy. He was from the Volta in Ghana, and he was just struggling. He was working in this ceramic factory for like tiles and marble, and he's in the middle of nowhere, and it was cold, and he's not going home, and the Pan-African moment has come, and please, let's do this. So I say that we should consult our ancestors. If you feel this resistance towards this idea, I just say that you consider it and you pray for it, and we need to start visualizing and putting the energy out there where we can actually just see ourselves as a society where we are in control and where things are fine, not just being responsive. I believe that if we put the energy out there just through prayer, whatever you do, whether you throw eggs, whether you do the cross, whatever, if the energy is there, not necessarily I need to pay my rent, I need to get through school, I need to pass this exam, but putting the energy out there. There's so many college students who need that energy. So many people who hold the future need that energy. So I say we put the energy out there, and the time for Pan-Africanism is here. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to
Let's finalize it.
We're gonna finalize this in 10 minutes. We're gonna take a few questions. Just one second. I have one thing to say. There's a lady here. She has a T-shirt with Africa and spread the word. She's a white lady. This is what gentrification is for me. I'm sorry. I had to say it.
Who's that gentleman down there?
Yeah, he's over here.
I'm sorry. I had to say it.
Where are we going?
Here.
Where is the mic going?
Here.
Oh, where's the other one?
There. I was struck. I'm sorry.
Guys, make it short because the brother who has written it on is sending the microphone somewhere else. I don't know why.
Is he here?
The cafe guy outside.
You might.
To make it short, for the Howard students, I would invite, and not only for them, for other people. Sylvia Robinson spoke here yesterday. She has a building, community center, ECAC, Emergence Community Arts Center, around the corner, 733 Euclid Street. Every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, we have an Ecology meeting where we are discussing all the stuff you talked about. We discussing growing our own food, creating alternative currencies. Those are not new. I went to school in Ithaca, New York at Cornell. They have Ithaca dollars. There's Anacostia dollars already in here. None of this stuff is new. It's been done, and it's being done. What we are not doing is doing it. I think to just synopsize what I was going to say, there's a very important book, I think, very profound book that I try to tell people to read. It's called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And the basic thing out of that book is that there's a narrative that the people who are in charge of this world go by, and we live by that narrative. One of the reasons why African people or people who consider themselves African are in the state we are is that we don't have a narrative that we require ourselves to live by. We are living by other people's narratives. And the things that we are not willing to do is to decide what that narrative is and then to commit ourselves to live by it. The Amish people in central Pennsylvania, middle Pennsylvania, they eschew most technology. They are very good with their hands. They build and grow and do everything as a group. And these are basically Europeans from Europe who basically divorced themselves from modern American technology and culture. And if they can do it, we can do it. There have always been groups of people in this country, the Native Americans, and even groups of black people who already do it. One of the things that we just refuse to do is decide what we are going to be. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. A demand is not asking a request, and if you don't get it, you say, okay, fine, okay, I guess I don't do it, right? A demand is like, if you don't do what we want you to do, and if you don't give me what I want, I'm gonna kick your ass until I get it. And we are not committed to that. The last poets, out of the 60s, the last poets had a song, Niggas Afraid of Revolution, okay? Even though Public Enemy says fight the power, niggas are still afraid of revolution because somebody's got to die in a revolution. We've just accepted that we will be the ones who die and there will be no revolution until we decide that we want to be in power. Whatever we have to do, and however that constitutes itself. Until we are the ones in power, we will sit in these rooms and complain about white people. I would love to be able to come to these meetings where we don't talk about white people, where we just talk about us.
That's right.
The brother there, can you move that way? Okay. Yeah, give it there.
Hey everybody, I'm Derek. What you said, and what Askia said is, what you said is from Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, right? And then that book they talked about the settlers and the colonists. That goes back to what you said about Bush people. We were doing what was right. We were living right. We had We had a low footprint, if you will, it's green business. We were doing it way back then. And the so-called queen said, you all are savages, you all not doing anything right. When in fact, we were doing it right, and we were living well, and we were living well. We had a plan back then. We were living well prior to them coming in, the colonists and coming in and disrupting us. So I just wanted to say that we were doing it well. But that disruption, that the wretched of the earth, if you will, have came in. They come in and put their stamp on it. And we got to get out of that stamp, that case, right? And I always talk about that. The term, you're talking about terms. The term black is really, I don't know if it's our term or a term they gave us. I don't know. It's up for discussion.
I know. I
it's a
say
term. I mean, if you look at it, if we go to the very top, we're human beings, and we're spirits in human form, right? And so we can be that versus I'm black or black love or black this, black that. If we come out of that canister, we're going to live the way universes live, or that energy like that. So to make it quick, that's what I thought, and I'd like to talk to you more about that stuff.
One more question.
I think let's finish it. Let's conclude the panels. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I'll be quick. My name is Melvin. I also attend Howard University. I wanted to reiterate my appreciation for Sankofa. I try to come here every day and get a meal and support. And I think in some ways it does link to what was stated earlier about the sister. I can't remember your name. I'm sorry. I'm the show. The sister right here? Sharikiana. I'm sorry. Yes, when she said in terms of us thinking that every event that we experience is new, I think a lot of that is because we don't necessarily have spaces like this where we're able to get the intergenerational conversation going. One of the films I love is Cadillac Records, because it shows in the early period how those early blues folk were dealing with distributors and how they were being exploited. And if you had folks who understood that history outside of just abstract, muddy waters and things of that sort, but as living flesh and blood human beings, then maybe some of these hip-hop artists nowadays were actually able to see what was done, how they were exploited, maybe what creative ways they could find to get around that. But because another part of gentrification is also the penetration of these NGOs and these sponsors who are coming in and limiting the types of conversation we can have and inflating a lot of black egos. Anybody who gets a mic gets funding and gets subsidized and things of this sort. Is a very repetitive conversation going on. And so it's only through spaces like this I find out that the new generation can improvise, because with no memory, you have lack of imagination. With no memory, you think everything you do is new. With no memory, you keep repeating. And they're going to keep endorsing that and subscribing that because there's no threat to them. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you once again, Dr. Garima, and everyone else here. I feel like Miles Davis and watching Bird and other folks perform, because you folks, I mean, you're reckoning what you guys have done. It's so inspiring to me. So just glad I had the opportunity.
Do you listen to us here in the morning?
Answer that question.
What's the thing you say? The creek.
Start by Lawrence Smith.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, and I'll repeat the question for those that don't remember the question. The question was, he was talking about the imam, he was talking about the reverend, and he was talking about the churches, and in essence, his question was about direct action. Do you take direct action to resolve your problem? That's how I understood the question. And my answer is absolutely. And I'll just give a brief example and then pass the mic. I live on Capitol Hill, and I travel a lot. And I was gone for 6 months, and I came back, and the neighborhood was about 2/3 black, and when I came back, it was 1/3 white. They moved the post office, they moved the police station, and they moved the bank. All that changed in this regentrification. So there's only 2 other black families left on my block. One of them is a dysfunctional family, and their backyard became a dumping ground. So the white neighbors wanted to call the district, have it ticketed, have the district pay large sums of money to clean it up. And then there would be a tax deed on the house, and then they would end up with the property. So I intervened. I didn't get much help from the neighbors, but I cleaned the backyard up, and I put a garden there. And now it's a very prosperous garden that I maintain, okay? One of the things that saved Cuba during, it was called the Special Period. And that's when Russia left. And America then put these draconian measures on them, was the gardening program. Everybody had a garden, including Fidel. He had a garden on his house, on top of his house. All of these people had gardens, and that's what saved them. So the remedy is that if you grow your own food, you can deal with a whole lot of other issues, and you can then cook your own food, and which is a whole process in itself in terms of bringing back some of this community stuff that we need and all the other stuff that goes with it. So I'll end with that. But a direct action is the answer. And everyone, when I say defend your block or defend your neighborhood, then you have to take direct action in your neighborhood. And you can start tomorrow, because there's things that need to be done. And you can intervene, and you can get it done, and you can maintain it.
Wrong day. Oh, no, I didn't have...
Closing remarks.
Closing remarks. White people do not have colder ice. White people do not have colder ice. Ice. Their ice is not colder than ours. You know, just I mean, that's about it. I mean, you know, solutions. You know, it's for me. It's just being just kind of country. I mean, I got my grandmother's from Mississippi, and it's like that's my Africa in a sense. At one point, I thought, when politics, I'm going to move to Africa. That's kind of far. I said, maybe the West Indies. Then I thought, well, Virgin Islands is actually part of America, and if I was in the Virgin Islands, I mean, it's still. And I said, well, Mississippi's a third world country. And so, you know, I'm just sort of thinking that, or rethinking the things that we thought were bad were good. And I mean, I want to share some things with you and with her later, but just on an individual level. But then I'm glad to be here. You know, Sankofa is my Cuba, so thank you all.
It is here and alone in the dark that we must make something new. It is here and alone in the dark that we must make something new. I will teach until I die.
Okay, excuse me, please, give the microphone, give him to send it out, but we're going to finish when we want to finish. Let him have the microphone, please. I don't need it.
Okay, but are you going to speak?
Who else? I'm going to come. Yeah. This is what's going to happen. One, please, everybody who doesn't get information from us, give Rahel your information so we can let you know. First, I just really want to say, I want to thank Rahel. She really, you know, when I do films, I tell actors, I go and I start a film and I say to them, you know what, I don't pay you. I'm not going to pay you, but I'm going to like order you around like I pay you. And that's the first audition. If they don't pass that, they're not in my film. So this sister, I give her all kind of rough time. But I want in public people to know that this young sister has put together these 3 events and other things. She's been a very important asset to us, and I want to really thank her in public. In private, I'm still going to whip her. Now, the second phase of it is to Howard young people. I know you are 3, okay? I know you are 3, 4, the most. But you're precious. You should know that. You dare to cross over from there to here. And sometimes we old ogre people, we're the Columbus who discovered everything. And sometimes we dangerously discourage people. To me, yes, I claim I plan to start the first black bank, but I haven't done it. So you better know that what you said for me is touching. And I just, Acklin and me, you know, we've been what teachers, but we've never started a black bank. But I think we should not discourage young people by being this Columbus discovered America. I think they need to be encouraged. I was very scared the brother was going to have a heart attack because he felt so nervous to be politically correct in whatever kind of words he used. Sankofa is a liberated territory. More than old folks, we're more about the young people, because in Sankofa, they're going to take it over. Sharik and me, in about 5-6 years, we got to take a break. And so, for me, you got to know, you folks who came from Howard, because I teach there, okay, I have all kinds of names all over the world, but my students at Howard do not want to own their own films like I do. I own everything I make. I want it to be an example to black kids at Howard. I have a new film out, it's all over Europe, okay? Because I'm not this Hollywood guy, my film students don't care about me. Don't come to me. I created this so they could come and see when I edit a film. Now the film is winning prize all over. They didn't know how it was made. They go look at me like a new person, but they never walked to the editing room to study and see how I put films together. And so for these young folks who comes, I'm very protective of you. I would never let this old ogre people discourage you. This is more your place than it is Ackland and mine. Okay? And so I don't care about who had tried the dollar idea, the bank idea, the 4 mule idea. You still have this more power than all of us. I'll tell you this. You're highly technologically more empowered than I and Ackland and all of us could ever be. Amen. When I went to film school, I didn't have all this technology. My film students had the most powerful brain. Ethiopians that go to colleges, they're even in Stanford, they're even in this, what they call this computer chips town in Stanford. What do they call it? Yeah, Ethiopians are there earning like you cannot believe it. These Ethiopians, their brain is in space age, but they have nothing to do. They're just only like saying, they're like looking at me like when they could do it better than I, they think I am. It's tragic. You are more equipped, I'm telling you, than all your parents, me, and all of us included. This you should know. When I came to Howard first, the first thing was this. A white friend, film school friend, and her boyfriend, who was a cameraman, came to DC. They came back to UCLA. I was never here in this part of the world. The first big population of black people I saw in America is Chicago and Atlanta. So they came and told me about a Sputnik, almost a black Sputnik. There was a black country called Washington, D.C. And they were scared to be here. They felt all the black people, they were lost in the neighborhood. Look, they were about to kill them. They were so nervous, they came like all the way to UCLA to scare the hell out of me. Then a brother called Larry Clark, who did a film Passing Through. I don't know if we have Sandwich in his name here. This brother came here for a conference representing the blacks who could not come. And then he came and told me about a Howard University radio station called The Drum. A Howard University, Chocolate City. And then he said, Haile, that's where we have to go. See, look at two different point of views. White folks scared the hell out of me. A brother came and says, Haile, that's where the drum is. Okay? Now, when I got here, of course, the drum dwindled into the conditioning of the black bourgeoisie, that is, destroy everything your past, so you'll just be something new, whatever that new is. And for you, I'll tell you, just listen to his music. You'll culturally be empowered. Every morning, if you get his language, his phraseology, the music he plays, you're having your cultural diet, not that cereal with boxes that brainwash you, but something that contradicts your cereal boxes. And you should hear his radio station. You should go to Ackland's basement as a group. People go all over. Ethiopian students went to his basement and say, teach us. in his basement. That's Ackland, the old man there. He's older than I. When I first met him, he was younger than I. And then I remained young and he went down and down. And I don't know when he's going to kick it, whatever that is. Now, I want to say this to you young people who are here. For us, take what you can and then give it your own historical location. Because you can only design your future. We can only talk about what we tried, what we did, what we'd like to dream. And you guys could implement, take what you can, and also give it your new science that we never had. I'm not a high-tech still, I can't operate a cell phone. I don't care, I'm not feeling no inferior complex. Because I see more black people operating cell phone, don't build no pyramid, don't write no book. They have no space, they have no rocket to send to the moon, but they are always texting in my class. Gurima's class is texting. I don't know who they're texting. I know it's not NASA. I know that. So technology is, it has its own trips. Ackland has addressed that. In fact, I'll give you a book. Read a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. We're going to bring it here by Neil Postman. There's a white guy who wrote it from Colombia. You think he wrote it for black people. I'm telling you, read this book. It's the most powerful book about what's happening to Americans in general. And then for anybody who wants to bail out from the idea of settler culture. Sharik said something that people, I don't know, caught up with. We talk at Sankofa this thing called settler psyche. Settler psyche. The phenomena of settler psyche, you find it in Israel, in the United States, in Australia, in all Latin American, Caribbean countries. Settler psyche is when you rob somebody's home and make it yours, so no one remembers to come to claim it. The settler psyche creates schools, libraries, books, television stations, and we too use the phraseology and the grammar and the vocabulary of settlers. That's why we don't communicate well, because our language is shaped and formed, our degree. How many black people want to burn their degree? Very few, I'm telling you. In Africa, it's an honor to say doctors something. It's like the military have a junta, like General so-and-so. The academicians have all this junta title of, even if it's MA, they have to make it like sound something big. You go to any professor's door, you have to read at the door, he's a doctor. So they have miseducated us, and we have taken it as an honor a badge of honor. And in our miseducation, we have never repented. Never repented. You talk about Liberia, Nkrumah, who invited some of the best brains of black America, Padmore, Ras McConnell, who done Padmore? Kennedy said, these black people are getting now to see the game because we're always 20 years ahead of giving them new games. We're going to use now black skin, black people who look like them who talk. Africans, Nkrumah especially admires African Americans. I'm going to send a CIA agent that's black and cripple his revolution. So it's African American CIA agents in the forefront and African Uncle Toms, as who the military juntas in Africa, together they shot our dream.